You just call your brother or your sister because you've got one grant and so you want to give the nearest relative a job? Or should you advertise it publicly and receive applications, and then there must be a procedure in place for screening the best candidates so that you will be sure that this money that has been put in trust in this organization is only hiring the most skilled people to do this job? So these are some things. There must be some policies that we talk about your recruitment, capacity building. Hello and welcome to Impact Bureau, a unique podcast brought to you by Mayan Organization. Impact Bureau is designed for NGO leaders, executives, founders, members, and trustees. Think of us on Impact Bureau as your unincorporated trustees who give you real advice that you wish your real board coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Hi everyone.
Hi,
Welcome to this week's episode of Impact Bureau.
Thank you for joining us. We're just as excited to dig into today's topic as you are to join as well. My name is Edem, and again, I'm with
Mo.
And together we'll be taking today's discussion, which is on something very crucial for your organization. It has to do with organizational policies. Before we go into it, I have something really cool for you as a gift for all your devotion to these episodes. I'm recommending to you this exciting book. It's titled The Big Idea Book. It has over 500 ideas that can change the world. And it's basically a curation of ideas from, AI about impactful ways that we can solve the world's problems. So find, a bookstore near you or go on Amazon or any of the, online bookstores and search for this book and give it a shot, read it to come up with or to see ideas that possibly could work even in your own local context as a social impact leader.
Yeah. Okay, so as we've rightly mentioned at the outset when we started the program, we are going to be discussing organizational policies today. And it's very important that after you design the strategy document or the strategy plan, you should be looking at what policies should your organization have. So today, that's what the whole conversation is going to be about. And we came prepared, as you can see.
We always do, we
White
always
on red.
do. Oh yeah, you like the
Fire.
contrast.
Everywhere.
She's shining. Can you see her sequin? She's shining. I said, let me compliment her.
Have you?
I don't want to look like the fly on the wall, but thank you for tuning in.
Yeah.
And so let's dive deep.
Today, let's start our conversation with determining the kind of policies that an NGO should even have in the first place.
Okay, so before I do that, let me just give like a brief. I always like to give you the foundation. So when you probably have heard this, if you're an NGO leader, executive, or founder, you've heard somebody at some point in time talk to you about organizational policies. They've asked you, a donor will ask to see your policies. So what are even policies? Because if you are like me, I just started out from project wanting to do good to finding herself with the whole organization in her hands. You probably never contemplated policies when you were starting out. So a policy is pretty much a guidance statement. It's a guiding statement around various aspects of your operations, of how you will operate, in line with good practices. Guiding statements, and usually it's useful for you internally. It also signals to people, externally relating with you. It tells them how far you can go, how far you cannot go,
how they should even deal with you.
Exactly. Yes. What's the nature of practice? How do you practice your own business or your own interventions?
So it's more like the principles that will guide you in various aspects.
Yes. It's a guiding statement on your principles, and for you internally, it's a guiding statement on internal principles that must not be violated. So these are things that let the world know, and even people within you know, who are you really?
I think this context you just give even makes sense because remember last week when we were discussing about the strategic plan, we said that you don't need to have all the resources ready. So in terms of human resources, some people will come into the life of your organization and they were not there when you were drafting your strategy document. So how do you get them to understand the principle that guides how you work internally and how you also
interface with the world? Exactly. So that's pretty much what your policies reflect. And so the question of how do I then determine what kinds of policies I should have? For any organization that is built on people, is built on resources, that is material resources, and is built on processes, you should have standard principles, that govern how you relate with people internally and externally. You should have standard principles that govern how you relate with financial, money. Because remember, this is money entrusted into your care to do some objective. In fact, you said, I always say, you said you are a non-governmental organization, so you want to be doing what government, yes, government obligations, you are fulfilling it and you're not the government. So people are trusting you. So what principles will govern that trust? So you have to have a statement around that. And generally, other aspects of your operations. Maybe you have vehicles, maybe you have equipment, maybe you have official premises. How do you keep it safe and conducive? So you will have, yes, how do you relate with stakeholders? The nature of your programs, who are you targeting? What kind of safeguarding are you putting in place to ensure that you never harm the targets that you're taking services to? So all of these things will govern or determine or influence the kinds of policies that you devise or run with as an organization.
So let's say I work my own context as an NGO owner. I work in an area where it's conflict ridden.
Okay.
And I work with children.
Okay.
Conflict children.
Okay.
What kind of policies do you think I should have?
Okay, and that's a very useful example. And in Nigeria, we do have some conflict hotspots. For instance, if you're in the northern part, even the Niger Delta, we've had historical issues with militancy and things like that. So it's very relevant. And you're working with children. Children in general are a vulnerable bracket because they are usually dependent. They rely on competent adults to make judgment, to exercise judgment on their behalf. So whether you are in a conflict-ridden area or not, already there's a measure of safeguarding that must come into place because of the nature of the targets you're working with. You have to protect, you have to ensure that the services you're taking do not cause any form of harm to the people that you're acting for or the children that are the so-called beneficiaries of your program. And I say this because there have been scandals in the past where people claiming to take, services to children have abused these children, or they've put up images, they've used these children and put up, images of these children that have created narratives and that these children will have to deal with even in their adult lives, things like that. So it's very important. Now, there are standard principles or policies any organization should have. You need to have, for instance, a finance procedure, some policies that reflect how you handle money you're spending. So it doesn't matter what nature of interventions you're doing in the world. As long as you're managing money, there should be some principles guiding that. A statement that tells how do you procure things, how do you make purchases, how do you do spendings, do you use a requisition based system, who does the approvals, what kind of checks and balances are there, how frequently do you audit, how do you report financial, who do you make report, how frequently should you do these things. So there must be some statements or guiding principles around the management of money, financials. There has to be something around people, right? You're working with people. Your administrative system is built of people and systems around how they are organized or deployed. So how do you recruit people? There should be a statement, some principles guiding that. You just call your brother or your sister because you've got one grant and so you want to give the nearest relative a job? Or should you advertise it publicly and receive applications, and then there must be a procedure in place for screening the best candidates so that you will be sure that this money that has been put in trust in this organization is only hiring the most skilled people to do this job. So these are some things. There must be some policies that we talk about your recruitment, capacity building. How do you evaluate? How do you ensure the best? How do you create a collaboration? So there must be statements around your administrative systems. If you have, now in the case of this example you gave, I would expect, if I'm a donor or any partner, I would expect to see a safeguarding document, a safeguarding policy that talks about how you intend to do your work in such a manner as never to harm or cause any form of disadvantage or injury to the people you are taking these services to. So will you have a safeguarding lead? If there is a complaint, who should these people reach out to? How will these people know the expectations of you and what not to, ask of you, or what, if something is violated, who should they talk to? when you do have complaints, how are they handled? I would want to see those things to make sure that if I'm supporting this kind of organization, I will never be caught in supporting you to do wrong. So these are statements I would expect to see. If you're in a conflict zone, as you talked
Risk
about,
management.
I want to see your risk management policy. I want to even see in your admin statement, I want to see how you're protecting your team members, your staff. Is there some insurance you're putting in place for working in hazardous conditions? Is there some means by which you're protecting their going out and their coming in? Or even your investments, are your property equipment, are they insured? So these are certain things that we want to see how well are you mitigating the risks in the environment or context you're working within. So to that example, these are some
anti-bribery and anti-corruption can also
in any context, really, because again, as long as you're working with external persons, you want to be sure that there's never going to be the risk of, some bribery exchange, some corruption. So that's a standard. That again will probably, in my opinion, would fall under standard policies that any organization should have. Yes.
Very insightful thoughts you shared on the first scenario. But let's say I'm an NGO. I don't work in a crisis area.
Okay.
I work with youth.
Okay.
I mean, like youths that are maybe job hunting, fresh out of school, university. I make use of technology a lot. In deploying my interventions.
Okay.
And I am even doing some nationwide coverage for the work that I do. What kind of policies should I have?
Okay, first of all, let me put a caveat. I'm not going to be able to paint every possible scenario because they're in our own organization. So your situation might not be captured or covered by these scenarios we are painting. But this should sort of clue you in, right? Again, if you're working with young people, again, depending on the ages, if they're not of the age of consent, then a measure of safeguarding always has to come in. Because anytime you're exercising a position of trust, or position where you are you have power, it's power dynamics, where there can be an abuse of that fiduciary trust, then you must show me your safeguarding measures. So I'm working with young people. Young people typically are, in terms of maybe they're income dependent, they're still dependent on maybe parents or whatever, right? They're trusting you that the information you're giving them is of higher value than what they have themselves. So there's a measure of trust in the relationship. So again, I would expect to see your safeguarding.
Does safeguarding end with children?
Of course not. Of course not. Even, persons living with disabilities. As long as there's a measure of, like I said, a fiduciary trust relationship activated, or a position of there's power. So sometimes if you're coming from maybe an urban position with urban privileges, and you're going into a rural context, you're taking power, you're in a position of power. So to that extent, you must safeguard the interest of the rural person who may not have access to TV, cannot see that footage that you're recording, how you're going to go and use it in a city television, and you go and depict them in a certain way. But they're adults, so it doesn't mean there's only children, but you abused your power. So any context where there's power position, you have to safeguard. You have to safeguard. But to the illustration you gave or scenario about these young persons, you're using technology.
A lot.
Issues of privacy, issues of security of data, issues of trust, all those things come in immediately. If I'm going to be deploying services through the internet or virtual space, or I'm going to gathering people's data, biodata, sensitive information, I have to protect their information. Privacy policies, I have to show the world and show those people that the information they share with me will not be abused or used for any purposes other than what I say I'm intending to use it for. So I won't go and sell it to somebody that wants to do broadcast, or sell it to one businessman that wants to be sending broadcast in the morning, so that he will be hitting them with marketing text messages because I took phone contacts that they shared with me in trust and sold it for money for commercial purpose. So these are things that people, you have to do. Also,
do you think a media consent form is relevant for both children and adults?
Oh, certainly, because most times you want to showcase your work. You want to showcase your work for the purpose of trust building. You also want to show as proof that money that was given to you, you actually deployed it. So that means that you're going to record. Most times you're going to record. You're going to show on social media. Sometimes you might go on traditional media, put it on the television. So if the nature of your program targets children, then you must get consent from those children. But children are not able to consent by the law, by the specific provisions of the law. So you're going through their guardians or their parents, right, to do that. Or if it's an adult, you're asking them for consent in the language in which they understand, the language that they can understand. So don't just go and write it in English and then you're going to people who don't have literacy in English language. That's
And
an
there's no
abuse.
translation.
And there's no effective translation telling them what is in there, what you're going to use it for, how long you will be sharing those footages or those, capture those media things you've captured. So you must get the content of any parties that you do program around where you want to tell a third party what you've done. You have to let them know that this is what it will be used for. Are you okay with it? Do you agree? It's important.
These two scenarios that have been painted,
Yes.
in a nutshell, what should be the principle that should guide anyone that is launching out to draft their
organizational policies?
Because, like you said, we might not be able to touch on scenarios that applies to everyone.
Yes. I think the rubric is you're dealing with people, you're dealing with resources, money, you're dealing with processes. So you should have a statement, a guiding statement along those lines. Now, these people are not only internal people, they are external people. The internal people, that will take you into a range of things like your admin policy, your HR policy, your, what do you call it? Your,
maybe IT policy.
Reward, yes, or your reward, I don't know, your system or incentive of incentivizing good performance, your performance evaluation policy, whatever, right? Professional development policy. You might have some of those things. Your external would capture things like safeguarding, depending on the profiles of the people you're working with. It will capture things like your anti-bribery and corruption policies. It will cover things like your whistleblowing policies and examples like that. Now, in terms of your procedures or your processes, you should have standard policies like your financial policy, your financials. You should have policies like your office management policies. So as simple as how frequently will you fumigate your office premises, or do maintenance, effective maintenance. We've heard of organizations that a lift, an elevator killed staff. I'm sure the story is, we cannot recall the tragedy of that doctor, may her soul rest in peace, because of poor maintenance. So these are examples when you're talking about procedures. What do you call it? Your utilities, your maintenance, your vehicles. You're going to be sending human beings that work for your organization on the road to communities in vehicles. These must be safe. So how frequently should you do your, vehicle maintenance, do your vehicle licensing and renewals of your papers and things like that? These are all important. And we've already talked about, we talked about financials, right? Yes. You should have your policies and statements. I would expect to see procurement policies when you want to purchase. How many years you go and get, bids, you go and do quotations in the market and then bring in these quotations for people to then see value for money. So these are all examples. And so having said that, now if you then do specific, maybe specialized work, you have to find out what kind of policies are relevant in that specialized area of your work. If I'm working with, refugees and IDPs, what kind of specific policies are a good practice? Yes, in that kind of space. If I'm dealing with, pregnant women, or I'm dealing with rehabilitation of commercial sex workers, these are things you think about. So what kind of policies are relevant in the context of the work that I'm doing? Specialized policies, not just the standard. So these are principles I would recommend.
Wow, that's quite a lot. Okay, so now I think we should talk about actually coming up with the policy.
Okay.
Am I engaging my board?
Okay.
How do I operationalize?
And let's talk about coming up with your policy first. Let's talk about the steps you should take. So typically, if you run with good practices, your board, depending on the governing structure of your organization, your policy should not just be created by management, and at that level, management just creates policies, approves the policies, and begins to implement the policy. Who does the management report to? They have a role to play also in the policy, landscape of that organization. So typically, your board must be the final approval entity of a policy. It does not become, in my organization, our policies don't become a working document until the board has approved it.
But can those are the bottom of the I don't want to use that word bottom, but
members of the team.
Members of the team that are not necessarily at managerial level. Can they also give an input in policy drafting?
Sometimes for organizations that have expert administrators or expert, administrators, it's really the domain of the administrator to come up with these working documents. These are administrative documents, administrative tools. But if you run a participatory system, if you run a participatory organization, I see no harm in sharing drafts with members to bring in their input that, oh, we are reviewing our policy and we would like your input. Or if you even prefer, instead of people working asynchronously, that is, instead of people working individually, you might even workshop it. You might say that we are reviewing this policy along these lines of good practice. We have checked these three organizations to see their own policy statements around this area, and we see improvements that can be made to our own. We've therefore included these three additional provisions. Can members of the organization do a reflective exercise on these new provisions? It's just like Nigeria, even when we want to review constitution, you know, the whole process of referendums and all those things. So it's more healthy. It's always a healthy approach to say, bring in as many people's inputs as possible. But I wouldn't say, because it's not your job, you have your primary job to do. And we at management have our own primary job. It's our job, it's our responsibility to shape the policy, you know, environment and to seek approvals. But it becomes more easy to operationalize these policies if people have had input. So that's why it's generally a good practice to open up for consultation.
This takes us to operationalizing. How do I operationalize?
So a policy is just words on paper. It does not by itself magically come into effect. Tangible steps, concrete steps must be taken. The first thing, once you've gotten your approval and the board has said, go ahead, implement, you have to communicate it to your members of staff or the team. Share the document around. If you didn't already do it in the review exercise, but share it. Oh, our organization has recently adopted a new maybe finance procedure
or a reviewed
finance procedure by the board, right? Please, everybody is given the following days or 2 weeks to familiarize themselves with this policy. At the end of the 2 weeks, we will hold a workshop or a reflective exercise. Remember, the goal is not just for people to.
Because I was going to say, how are we even sure that people would actually
you take steps. Everything you do to take steps. The best way you can guarantee an outcome is to ensure interaction, is to ensure engagement. So if I've shared it with you that way, I'm going to have a session where I want to hear your understanding of it. What do you understand by this new document? How does it affect your work? So you do trainings. Let's move to that after. Apart from communicating, you then do trainings. Another thing you should do is there should be somebody responsible for every policy in an organization at every given point in time. That person is saddled with the obligation or responsibility to give effect to the provisions. In other words, ensuring that other people are aware of the provisions, ensuring that it is integrated into the systems of the organization. So, take for instance an IT policy. There has to be somebody that then has the logbook and is responsible for knowing or coordinating how many IT related equipment do we have, which ones were taken out for this project, which ones came back. So there must always be somebody responsible for a policy document at every point in time. If it's admin that has 5 policies under their domain, what steps are they taking to make sure that it is built into the operations? When they say operationalizing, it means that these provisions are built into the working operations. So if we are going to be maintaining our vehicles, we'll be doing servicing every quarter. There should be a logbook. Somebody is responsible for ensuring, and checking it. Happens. Thank you. And making sure that maintenance was conducted. When was the last time maintenance was conducted? Oh, this month. Okay, it is therefore due in this month. And a reminder is sent to every person who has a role to play in that these vehicles must be turned in for maintenance on so dates, because this weekend they will be going in for complete servicing and upkeep. Example, do you understand? So that's the way it works.
Will there ever be a time when a new policy is introduced?
Certainly. Because sometimes when you start out, remember we talked about even in your strategy document that the world is constantly changing. So sometimes the new emerging practices, the new emerging phenomena in the world will inform how you should respond to it. There was a time that there was nothing like social media to deal with. So organizations did not have social media policies. Organizations did not have new media policies. But as far back as maybe a decade ago or decade plus, social media became part of organizational practices. So people had to start creating new media policies. If I'm going to communicate my work or market my product or my services on new media, what must be the guiding principles around this? If I'm going to run interventions where I'm going to be showing people in communities on social media, what must be the guiding principles? Remember? So these are examples of how new policies can emerge in any, landscape.
Practically, was there ever a time when new policies were introduced to marrying?
Oh, certainly, certainly. Like, when we started, for instance, we used to just do consent. I'll give an example. As part of our, program implementation, policies and strategies.
What kind of consent was that?
So, consent to participate. You have to give us your consent that you agree to participate in this program, especially if it's school children, maybe community-based children, young people, even rural-based.
How did you go about it? Was it different for a child that was in school and then a child that is in a community that was?
So yes,
interacting with
absolutely. So
directly?
most times in the past, when we used to, our first approach was to get consent. We'll go to the government will give you approval, which is a form of consent, right? You then go to the schools, and the schools will be asked to please select participants. And by virtue of the school's approval or consent to participate, we deemed it as consent for all the children who are brought into the program. But later on, we discovered that that's not sufficient. You must have the individual, because sometimes some of these children are drafted by force, they're coerced into these programs. Maybe the school feels that these are their best, the ones that will give the school a good look, a good appearance. And maybe the child is not interested. So we discovered that it's not good practice to stop at the level of school approval or consent. You should get the individual consent from every child, and that means that parental consent comes in. So the child's parent or guardian has to be the one to approve, to say yes. And usually that approval will come because that parent or guardian has had a conversation with their child. The child will say, I like it, I want to participate. The parent will compare, look at their overriding circumstances and say, well, I need you at home at this time, but this is important, so go ahead, I will release you. So all those factored in, and then we started getting these kinds of consent. Other aspects, like I was talking about, we only used to focus on consent to participate.
In the community.
In the community, we would, of course, most times have to go through parents.
Okay, like
so households.
Yeah,
so for community level involvement, you would have had to, we would approach maybe depending on how the community is organized. So it depends. Sometimes you could go through religious bodies in the community. Sometimes we could go through landlords and residents associations. Sometimes we could go through artisan groups. And we would then organize programs for the children or young persons or members of families of these artisan groups.
Okay, so what changed? What changed?
We still approach it that way. It's just that, again, the individual child has to bring in consent from their parents. But for communities, the community is not just a phantom place. You must go to a community through a group. You must access a community through a group or through a leader, right? So that leader's consent cannot be, representative of every child's consent. So the leader is just a gatekeeper, or the point of entry. Just don't miss it for consent. Is the point of entry. They are what we call gatekeepers. So you don't have to get to see the person you want, but you must get the consent of that person that you want, right? Now, again, to the question about in terms of consent, so we now upgraded our consent to also include media consent. Because somebody might agree to participate, but they don't want all their information shared or pictures, shared publicly. So you then have to expressly let them know that, we will publish this in our report, our annual report. It will involve your image contained in our published annual report. Do you consent? Those who don't, they have ways of, making that statement. I will make sure that we don't put their footage in these reporting, whether it's social media channels or publication channels. So you have to respect people's consent. But that was a feature we added. Since you asked the question of what new kind of consent have we added? Yes, that's an example.
My final question. So how frequently should you review your policy?
Well, I mean, for that, I would recommend good practices. You don't want to be doing it too frequently that it takes up the time for the actual work of the organization, because policy review processes are intensive processes, right? And you also don't want to review it too belatedly that you're not responding adequately to times and seasons and changes. So you should have a healthy, approach to it. I remember when I was starting my organization, at some point I was saying, I was projecting that I would be reviewing my policies every year. It was a board member who was a retired secretary of the University College Hospital, who said to me, don't do that. You will trap yourself in bureaucracy, like you will trap yourself in endless, review exercises, and you won't have enough, you will engage even the board members too much on this and will not have enough energy to deploy in other
Other
important
things.
areas. So I remember she said to me, for your administrative policy, remember she was a retired administrator,
Yeah.
that she recommended for me 2 years for
Okay.
reviewing my administrative policies. For these kinds of things, Google is your friend. Just check what is a good practice. How frequently should I update my finance policy? How frequently should I update my safeguarding policy? Because there are new information coming into these spaces all the time. So what's a good benchmark time-wise to give yourself? Just check. I won't come and prescribe. I'm not going to give you a
Yeah.
formula. What I will say though is that you need to have a principle of updating, reviewing your
Yeah.
policies. What you started with 5 years ago might not be adequate to take care of present times. So have that mindset that your policies and guiding principles will need to be subjected to reviews. And then you then begin to ask around and inquire what timelines should I use or embrace for these reviews. And you're good to go.
Okay. Wow. So there you have it, guys. Fire, water. I'm always quenching the energy when it's getting fully.
I like that.
I'm sure you've learned a lot from today's, podcast. Or even sticking by, it means you've been learning a lot. So we've brushed through how do you determine the kind of policies you should have, how should you engage your board in drafting your policies, how should you review, how frequently should you update your policies, approvals from boards, adding new policies, looking at your context, and then coming up with something meaningful to run your organization.
It was a lot. It was a lot. And if
You
you
guys
get confused, I always say to you, we're here to handhold you and help you through the process.
Yeah.
We support organizational leaders with tools and resources.
Yeah.
So this is just one step in the way we can help you. You can reach out to us if you need more like guidance, direct guidance and handholding through these processes. And mine is always available. Thank you for tuning in once again. Looking forward to meeting you next week on another episode. Take care.